The Queen claimed me in public. Not a single voice dared answer. The Earth had long been a beacon of life and hope in the vast expanse of space. But that hope was now fading. The great cities of humanity were crumbling under the weight of the Zelari Empire's invasion. It started with an attack on the moon colonies, and then the Empire's warships appeared in Earth's orbit. No one had expected this war. The humans had tried to reach out to make peace, but the Zelari were not interested in negotiations. They were interested in domination. In the heart of the conflict, Ethan Drake, a former soldier, stood facing the reality of a world that was quickly losing its will to fight. Once, he had been one of the best fighters on Earth, trained to protect his people from any threat. But after the first wave of the Zelari assault, things changed. The rebel groups had sprung up, but they lacked unity. Despite their best efforts, it seemed like the aliens were always one step ahead. Ethan's team had been ambushed during a battle in New York. Buildings once towering with pride now lay in ruins, and the streets were filled with silence, the once bustling city reduced to a war zone. Ethan had fought hard, but the Zelari forces were overwhelming. Their weapons were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Energy blasts that could disintegrate metal, and soldiers enhanced by cybernetic technology that gave them strength far beyond what any human could possess. In the chaos of the battle, a powerful explosion had thrown Ethan to the ground. His leg was crushed, leaving him immobile as his comrades fought on around him. Ethan had always been the strong one, the one who could keep going no matter what. But as he lay there, helpless and in pain, he realized that he might not survive this war. Worse, he might not be able to lead his people anymore. Days passed before he was found. He was dragged to the makeshift medical center, where doctors scrambled to save those who could still fight. But Ethan knew, deep down, that he was no longer the soldier he once was. He had lost his leg. He had lost his chance to fight for his people. But there was still a glimmer of hope. Dr. Helena Grant, a brilliant scientist and bioengineer, was working on new technology that could potentially turn the tide of the war. She had been experimenting with cybernetic enhancements, giving humans new limbs, new abilities, and new chances at survival. When she saw Ethan, she recognized the opportunity. If she could save him, he could still lead the resistance. Helena was no stranger to loss. She had lost her family to the Zelari when they first arrived. Her parents had died in the initial attack, and her younger brother had been taken, likely for some horrific purpose. She was driven by a desire to stop the Empire at all costs. She believed that Ethan could be the key to turning the war around, but the procedure she proposed was risky, far beyond anything she had attempted before. As Ethan lay in a medical bed, unable to move and unsure of what to do with himself, Helena made her pitch. She explained her plan to give him a new leg, something more than just a prosthetic. She was offering him a hybrid of biological tissue and mechanical components, designed to not only replace his leg, but to enhance his strength, agility, and endurance. She knew the risks, but she also knew that Earth's resistance needed someone like Ethan to lead them. At first, Ethan refused. The idea of becoming a cyborg, a machine, seemed like a step too far. He had always been human, and he had always believed that his strength came from within. But as he thought about the war, about the people depending on him, he realized that his pride could no longer stand in the way. Earth needed him. Humanity needed him. And if this was the only way to fight back, then he would have to take it. The decision was made. He would go through with the procedure. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be no guarantee that the procedure would work, and even if it did, there would be those who saw him as nothing more than a machine. But if it could help him save his people, then he had to try. Helena began the procedure. It was a slow, painful process. They had to carefully graft cybernetic components into his body, meshing them with his remaining tissue. It took days, and as each hour passed, Ethan felt more and more like a stranger to himself. But when the final phase of the operation was complete, and he stood up for the first time on his new leg, it was like nothing he had ever felt before. The new leg was powerful. It was more than just a replacement. It was an enhancement. He could feel the strength flowing through him. His movements were faster, his reflexes sharper. It was like he had gained something more than just his leg back. He had gained a new purpose. As he tested the new limb, walking with a new sense of confidence, Ethan realized something. He was no longer just a man. He was something else, something greater. He could feel the power coursing through his body, and for the first time in weeks he felt hope. But it wasn't enough. The Zelari were still out there, and they were stronger than ever. Ethan knew that in order to lead the resistance, he would need more than just a new leg. He would need to rally the people, to show them that they could still fight back. The queen of the Zelari Empire, Serafina, had claimed Earth as her territory. She believed that humanity was nothing more than a minor nuisance, a species to be crushed under the weight of the Zelari's superior technology. But Ethan wasn't done. He would fight. He would lead. And he would prove to the Zelari that humanity was not done yet. With the new leg and a fire rekindled in his heart, Ethan Drake stepped into the war once more. He wasn't just fighting for Earth anymore. He was fighting for the future of humanity itself. And no matter the cost, he would never give up. Ethan stood in the makeshift medical room, his new leg still unfamiliar to him. It felt like an extension of his body, yet it wasn't quite human, and it reminded him of everything he had lost. The room around him was sterile and cold, filled with the hum of machines and the distant sounds of chaos from outside. The world had changed, and so had he. The procedure had taken a toll on his body. His muscles were sore, his nerves still adjusting to the cybernetic enhancements that now coursed through him. But he didn't have the luxury to rest. Earth was still under attack, and every day the Zelari tightened their grip. The Queen, Serafina, was not going to wait for humanity to recover. She had come to Earth with one goal, total domination, and if humanity didn't fight back soon, they would be lost forever. Doctor. Helena Grant, the scientist who had given him his new leg, approached him with a look of quiet determination. She had been working tirelessly on her bioengineering project, trying to enhance human capabilities to give Earth a fighting chance. Her own family had been wiped out in the first wave of the invasion, and she was determined not to let humanity fall without a fight. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice filled with a mix of hope and concern. "You've made it this far. The new limb is working, but it's just the beginning. We need you to lead. The resistance is growing, but they need someone with your strength to unify them." Ethan nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the floor. His thoughts raced as he struggled with the weight of her words. He had been a leader before, but this was different. The war had shattered everything he knew. Many of his friends were gone, and the once proud resistance was fractured. People were scared, and fear was the enemy's greatest weapon. They needed hope, and they needed someone to show them that there was still a chance to win. He felt the pulse of his new limb, and with it, a spark of something inside him. He had always believed that the human spirit was the strongest weapon. It wasn't the weapons they carried or the technology they used that made them powerful. It was their will to survive, to adapt, to fight for each other. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to stop the Zelari. Helena handed him a data pad. "We've gathered intelligence about the Zelari's movements. Their main forces are concentrated in the cities, but we've located weak points. We can strike back, Ethan. We have a chance." Ethan studied the map, his eyes scanning over the coordinates. The Zelari forces were spread thin, but their technology was so advanced that it seemed like nothing could touch them. Still, Ethan knew that if they waited any longer, Earth would be lost. He couldn't afford to wait. "All right," Ethan said, his voice steady, but with a fire that burned behind his words. "Gather the resistance. We strike tonight. It's time to show the Zelari that they underestimated us." Helena nodded, her face lighting up with determination. She turned and quickly moved to gather the troops. Ethan stood alone for a moment, his hand resting on the edge of the table, feeling the strength of his new leg beneath him. It was more than just a tool. It was a reminder of what he was capable of and what he still had to lose. The night was quiet, but the tension was palpable. Ethan stood at the head of a group of fighters, humans and rebels from across the globe, all united by the same cause. They were a ragtag group, some seasoned soldiers, others civilians with no military experience, but they all had one thing in common, the desire to survive. And under Ethan's leadership, they had a chance. They moved swiftly through the shadows, avoiding Zelari patrols and slipping into the heart of the city. Ethan's new leg gave him an edge, his movements faster, more precise. But he didn't let it define him. It was just another tool in his arsenal. His mind, his spirit, that was what made him a leader. As they reached their target, a key supply depot, the sound of distant explosions echoed through the night. The battle had already begun. Ethan's pulse quickened, his senses sharpened. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. It was their first real attack against the Zelari, and failure was not an option. Ethan gestured for the group to spread out. They moved in coordinated silence, taking out guards and setting explosives at key points. As they worked, Ethan's thoughts raced. The Queen, Serafina, was the true threat. She was a force unlike any they had ever faced, ruthless, calculating, and determined. But Ethan knew one thing for sure: she didn't understand humanity. She didn't understand the drive that kept them going, even when everything seemed lost. The Zelari forces didn't know what hit them. Within minutes, the depot was in chaos. The rebels moved like shadows, striking with precision, taking down Zelari soldiers and destroying their supplies. Ethan's new leg made him faster than ever, his reflexes sharpened. But it was his mind that drove the assault. He could read the battlefield, anticipate the enemy's next move, and adapt on the fly. As the last of the Zelari soldiers were taken out, the resistance fighters stood together, victorious for the first time in a long while. They had struck back, and the Zelari hadn't seen it coming. Ethan looked around at his team, their faces filled with a mix of exhaustion and relief. They had won a small battle, but it was a victory nonetheless. And in war, victories were what mattered. They needed to hold on to this moment to remind themselves that they could still fight, that they could still win. Helena walked over to him, her expression a mixture of admiration and concern. "We've done it, Ethan, but this is just the beginning. The Zelari will retaliate. We need to be ready for whatever comes next." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. But for the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't in weeks: hope. "We're ready," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "We'll be ready for anything." Ethan stood at the command center, his gaze fixed on the map that illuminated the dimly lit room. The battle for Earth was no longer just a series of small skirmishes. It had become something bigger, something humanity hadn't faced before. The Zelari Empire was strong, and their queen, Serafina, had proven to be a ruthless leader. But Ethan had learned one thing: if they were going to survive, they had to fight smarter. The resistance had grown stronger in the weeks since their first victory. What had once been a scattered group of rebels was now a united force, led by Ethan and his core team. They had started to strike back at the Zelari, targeting supply lines, communications hubs, and small military outposts. Each mission, though small, was a victory. And with every victory, the morale of the human fighters grew. But there was still much work to be done. Ethan's new leg had proven to be a powerful asset in combat. It allowed him to move faster, jump higher, and strike harder than ever before. But the true power came from his mind. He had always been a strategist, able to read the battlefield and adapt to the situation. Now, with his enhanced body, he was an even greater threat. His leadership had brought hope to a broken people, but he knew it was only a matter of time before the Zelari would retaliate. "Ethan," Helena's voice interrupted his thoughts. "We've received new intel. The Zelari are amassing a large force in the northern regions. They're preparing for a major assault on our position." Ethan turned to face her. Her face was tense, her eyes filled with concern. He could see the strain in her expression. This was the moment they had all feared. The Zelari were finally going to make their move. "We need to hit them first," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "If we wait for them to come to us, we'll be fighting on their terms. We'll strike fast, hit their supply lines, and make them think we're stronger than we really are." Helena nodded, her eyes still locked on the map. "It's risky. If we misstep, they'll have us cornered." Ethan didn't flinch. "I know, but we don't have the luxury of waiting. We've got to keep them on the back foot. We'll use guerrilla tactics, hit them where they least expect it." Over the next few days, the resistance prepared for their most daring mission yet. They would infiltrate the northern regions, strike at the heart of the Zelari's supply network, and sabotage their military operations. It was a high-risk plan, but it was their best shot. If they could disrupt the Zelari's preparations, they could buy time for the rest of humanity to organize a proper defense. The night before the mission, Ethan sat alone in his quarters. He looked at his new leg, flexing it and testing its range of motion. The cybernetic enhancements had become a part of him, but he could still feel the weight of what he had become. He had once been human, but now he was something else, something more. He didn't know if that made him stronger or less human. But as the leader of the resistance, he couldn't afford to dwell on questions like that. He had a job to do. The next morning, Ethan led his team out into the frigid northern landscape. The air was cold and harsh, but the determination in his heart kept him warm. The resistance fighters had become his family, and they followed him with unwavering trust. Each of them knew the risks. Each of them understood that they might not come back from this mission. But they also knew that if they succeeded, they would deal a blow to the Zelari that would echo across the galaxy. The journey to the northern region was treacherous. They moved quickly, staying off the main roads to avoid detection. The Zelari had set up several checkpoints, and the resistance had to be careful to avoid the enemy's patrols. Ethan led the way, his new leg carrying him with a fluidity he had never known before. His senses were sharper and his reflexes faster. He was a machine in many ways, but it was his human spirit that guided him. As they neared the Zelari base, the air grew tense. The resistance fighters knew that they were getting closer to the heart of the enemy's operation. This was the moment they had trained for. The moment when everything could change. Ethan signaled for the group to halt. They were just outside the enemy's perimeter, and he could see the glow of the Zelari's energy shields in the distance. They had to move fast. There was no time to waste. "Move out," Ethan whispered, his voice steady. "Stick to the plan. We hit them hard and fast, no hesitation." The team split into smaller groups, each tasked with a specific target. Ethan and a few others would take out the supply depot, while the rest of the team would disable the communication relay. The mission was simple in its design, but execution was everything. One mistake, and they would be caught in the open. The first explosion shook the ground, followed by the sound of gunfire. The Zelari soldiers were caught off guard, and the resistance fighters moved quickly, taking out the enemy's defenses with surgical precision. Ethan's heart raced as he led his team through the chaos. His new leg made him faster than ever, allowing him to jump over barriers and reach key targets with ease. He was a blur of movement, taking down soldiers one by one, his team following close behind. But the Zelari were quick to respond. Reinforcements began to arrive, and the battle turned chaotic. Ethan's team fought fiercely, but the numbers were overwhelming. The enemy was relentless, and they weren't going to give up without a fight. The sound of explosions and gunfire filled the air, and the once frozen landscape became a battleground. Ethan gritted his teeth, pushing forward. His new leg was working perfectly, but it wasn't enough to guarantee victory. They needed to finish their mission, and fast. With the supply depot in sight, Ethan signaled to his team to make their final push. They reached the depot, and Ethan planted the explosives. The countdown began, but just as they were about to leave, the ground shook beneath them. A massive Zelari warship had appeared overhead, blocking their only escape route. It was larger than anything they had seen before, a towering behemoth that dwarfed anything Earth had ever produced. The Zelari had come for them. "Retreat!" Ethan shouted. "Move now." The resistance fighters sprinted toward the nearby hills, but the warship unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, forcing them to take cover. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he led his team through the chaos. The mission was a success, but they were now facing an enemy far more powerful than they had ever anticipated. As they reached the safety of the hills, Ethan looked back at the burning base. They had disrupted the Zelari's plans, but they had also drawn the attention of their most dangerous weapon. The war was no longer a series of small battles. It had become an all-out fight for survival. Ethan's mind raced as he realized the true scope of what they were up against. The Zelari were relentless, and they would stop at nothing to crush humanity. But Ethan was no stranger to adversity. He had always believed in the strength of humanity's spirit. Now more than ever, he needed to believe in it. "Get ready," he said, his voice steady. "This war isn't over. We've only just begun." The resistance fighters nodded, their faces grim but resolute. They had struck the Zelari, and they had survived. But the real fight was only beginning. They had to be ready for whatever came next. The atmosphere was tense as Ethan and his team retreated into the dense forest, their hearts still racing from the close call with the Zelari warship. The mission had been a success, but it had come at a cost. The Zelari forces were now fully aware of the Resistance's presence, and they would stop at nothing to crush them. They had hit back hard, but the retaliation was inevitable. Ethan's new leg had proven itself invaluable in the heat of battle. It had given him speed, power, and the ability to move with a precision he had never known. But as he looked around at his team, exhausted, battered, but still standing, he knew that the fight ahead would not be won with strength alone. It would take every ounce of strategy, every bit of ingenuity they had to survive the coming storm. The day after the attack, the resistance regrouped in a hidden safe house deep within the forest. The air was thick with uncertainty, but also with determination. This was their home for now, a place of refuge from the relentless Zelari hunt. They were safe for the moment, but Ethan knew it wouldn't last long. The Zelari were thorough. They would come looking for them. Helena was the first to approach him as he stood near the entrance, watching the thick clouds overhead. Her face was drawn, tired from the relentless work of supporting the resistance. She had been on the front lines of their technological efforts, working tirelessly to develop better weapons and tactics to use against the alien invaders. But even her brilliance had its limits. "Ethan," she said quietly, "we've heard rumors. The Zelari are planning something bigger. They're not just sending more soldiers, they're sending their best. They're elite warriors." Ethan turned to face her. "We knew this was coming. They're going to retaliate, but we've got to be ready." She nodded but didn't look convinced. "I don't think we're ready. We've won some battles, yes, but we don't have the strength to face them head-on. If they bring their elite forces, we're outmatched." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, but we can't sit back and wait for them to come to us. The more we delay, the stronger they get. We need to strike first, hit them where it hurts." Helena looked at him for a long moment, her expression torn. "You're asking for another miracle. After everything we've been through, another victory seems impossible." Ethan stepped closer, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "It's not about miracles, it's about belief. Belief that we can win, that we can make them pay for what they've done. We might be outnumbered, but we're not out of options." Helena didn't respond immediately, but her eyes softened, and she gave a small nod. Ethan could see that she was still unsure, but she trusted him. She had to. They all had to trust each other if they were going to survive. That night, as the stars flickered overhead, Ethan sat alone outside the safe house, his thoughts racing. The resistance was growing, but it wasn't enough. He had to make a choice, one that could either turn the tide of the war or seal their doom. The Zelari had their elite forces, cybernetic warriors that were faster, stronger, and more ruthless than any human could ever hope to be. They were designed to crush resistance, to destroy anything that stood in the way of the Zelari's control. And now, they were coming for them. Ethan knew that he couldn't take them on directly, not with their superior technology. But if he could find a way to turn their own tactics against them, to use their own strength as a weakness, maybe they had a chance. The plan began to form in his mind as he thought back to the previous battle. The Zelari were strong, but they were not invincible. They had weaknesses, and those weaknesses could be exploited. He knew that if they could hit the Zelari at the heart of their operations, they might just have a shot at winning. He stood up and made his way to the command center where Helena and the other leaders were gathered. The room was quiet, the hum of the computers the only sound. They all looked up as Ethan entered, their faces filled with concern. They had been discussing their next move, but there was no easy answer. "I've been thinking," Ethan began, his voice calm but filled with determination. "We can't fight the Zelari head-on. Not with their elite forces coming for us. But there's another way. We need to go after their command centers. We need to hit them where they make their decisions, where they plan their attacks." Helena raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about going straight for the heart of their operation? Ethan, that's suicide. They'll be ready for us." "We don't have a choice," Ethan replied. "If we sit here and wait for them to come to us, they'll wipe us out. But if we take the fight to them, we can turn the tables. We know their supply lines are already stretched thin. We can use that to our advantage." There was a long silence as the group absorbed what Ethan was proposing. The risk was enormous, but it was the only option they had left. Finally, one of the other leaders, a grizzled veteran named Marcus, spoke up. "You're right. We can't just sit here. We've been on the defensive long enough. It's time we took the fight to them. If we're going to win this war, we need to strike first." Ethan nodded, his heart racing. "We'll move out in the morning. We'll hit the Zelari's command centers, disrupt their operations, and show them that we're not afraid to fight back." The team gathered around, their faces set with determination. They knew the risks. They knew that this mission could very well be their last, but they also knew that they had no choice. They had to fight for their survival, for the future of humanity. As Ethan looked around at his team, he felt a surge of pride. These men and women had been through so much already, and yet they were still willing to fight. They were no longer just a group of rebels, they were a force to be reckoned with. and as long as they had each other, they had a chance. The next morning, the team set out, their movements quiet and precise. They moved through the forest, their destination clear in their minds. The Zelari command centers were heavily guarded, but the resistance had the element of surprise on their side. They had to move fast, strike hard, and then get out before the Zelari could regroup. As they approached the first target, Ethan's heart raced. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the mission bearing down on him, but he didn't let it show. He had led them this far, and he wasn't about to fail them now. The attack was swift and brutal. The Zelari didn't see them coming. Ethan and his team hit their target with precision, taking out key personnel and disabling their communications. The Zelari forces were in disarray, and the resistance was able to slip away before the enemy could respond. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. The team had struck at the heart of the Zelari's operations, and they had done it with minimal casualties. The mission was a success, but the real test was yet to come. They had drawn first blood, but the Zelari would not back down so easily. As Ethan looked back at the burning command center, he knew that this was just the beginning. The war was far from over, but with every victory, they were one step closer to taking Earth back from the Zelari. And they weren't going to stop until they had won. The days following their successful strike at the Zelari command center were filled with anticipation. The team had managed to deal a significant blow to the enemy, but they all knew that this was just one small victory in an ongoing war. The Zelari were not a force to be underestimated. Their response would come swiftly, and it would come with a vengeance. Ethan stood on the edge of the resistance base, looking out at the horizon. The wind was cold, and the world around him was quiet, almost too quiet. He had seen too many people lose everything to feel peace in the stillness. His mind raced, constantly running through their next moves. The enemy would be coming for them soon. But this time, Ethan had a plan. The attack on the Zelari command center had disrupted their operations, but the retaliation would be swift. Ethan's team had managed to slip away undetected, but he knew that they wouldn't be so lucky the next time. The Zelari had vast resources, and they were relentless. But that was what made them dangerous. If they underestimated humanity, they would be caught off guard. Helena approached him, her footsteps soft on the ground. She had been working tirelessly to ensure the team was ready for whatever came next. She had become a close ally, and her intelligence had played a key role in their successes, but Ethan could see the worry in her eyes. She had her doubts just like the rest of them. "Ethan," she began, her voice soft but steady, "we've been making progress, but we're running out of time. The Zelari won't give us a chance to breathe. They'll come for us with everything they've got." Ethan turned to face her, his expression firm. "I know, but we've got something they don't have. We've got hope, and we've got each other." Helena sighed, her eyes darkening with worry. "Hope isn't going to stop their warships. Hope isn't going to stop their elite forces. We need more than just hope, Ethan. We need a plan that actually works." Ethan's gaze hardened. "We'll make it work. I've seen what these people are capable of. The resistance is stronger than you think." Helena nodded slowly, but she didn't look convinced. Ethan could see the exhaustion in her eyes. It wasn't just the physical strain, it was the mental weight of the war. They were all carrying it, every single one of them. The world had been thrown into chaos, and they were the ones left to clean up the mess. But Ethan didn't have the luxury of doubt. He had led them this far, and he would lead them until the end. If there was even a chance of winning, he had to take it. The next morning, Ethan called a meeting with the core members of the resistance. They gathered around the table, their faces tired but determined. This was the moment that would define them, the moment that would either push them to victory or end in defeat. Ethan had a plan, and they were going to follow it. "We've made our move," he began, his voice steady. "Now we strike where it hurts. We'll hit their power sources, their military infrastructure, and their leadership. We're not going to wait for them to come to us. We're going to make them fight on our terms." The room was silent as they processed his words. Everyone knew what was at stake. The Zelari had the technology, the resources, and the numbers, but they didn't have what humanity had, determination. They didn't have the will to fight for their homes, their families, their future. One of the resistance members, a woman named Mara, spoke up. "You're talking about taking on their entire empire, Ethan. We can't do it all at once. We have to pick our targets carefully." Ethan nodded. "I know. We'll start with their key supply routes and their communication networks. We need to cripple their ability to move resources and relay commands. The more chaos we cause, the harder it will be for them to stay organized. The plan was set. It was dangerous, but it was the best shot they had. They would hit fast, hit hard, and get out before the Zelari could retaliate. If they could disrupt the Zelari's ability to coordinate their forces, they would be able to buy themselves some time. And time was something they desperately needed. For the next few days, the resistance worked quickly to prepare. Helena and the others worked on gathering intel, mapping out the Zelari's movements, and designing new weapons that could give them an edge. Ethan trained with his team, pushing them to their limits. They were ready. The night before the mission, Ethan sat alone in his quarters, thinking. The weight of leadership was heavy, and the decisions he made now would determine the future of Earth. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Lives were on the line, his people's lives. He had already lost so much, and he couldn't afford to lose any more. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Helena. "Ethan," she said, her voice softer than usual. "I just wanted to say I don't know how you do it. You've led us through so much already. But this next part, it's bigger than anything we've faced." Ethan looked up at her, his expression steady. "It's not just me, Helena, it's all of us. We're in this together." Helena smiled faintly, though there was sadness in her eyes. "I hope you're right, because this time if we fail, we won't fail," Ethan interrupted, his voice firm. "We've come too far to turn back now." The next day, they set out on their mission. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back. Ethan led his team through the dense terrain, their destination clear, the heart of the Zelari's military network. They moved quickly, using every tactic they had learned to avoid detection. Every step brought them closer to their goal. As they reached their target, Ethan felt the adrenaline kick in. The mission was dangerous, but they had no choice. They had to strike. They had to win. The attack was swift and precise. The resistance fighters infiltrated the Zelari base, taking out key personnel and disabling the power grid. Explosions rang out as their charges went off, causing massive disruptions throughout the base. The Zelari forces were caught off guard, their command structure in disarray. But just as they were about to escape, a massive explosion shook the ground. A Zelari warship had arrived, blocking their only exit. The resistance was trapped. Ethan's heart pounded as he assessed the situation. They couldn't afford to be caught. The plan had worked, but they were out of time. "Fall back," he shouted. "Get to the extraction point." The team fought their way through the Zelari soldiers, using everything at their disposal to push forward. Ethan's enhanced leg gave him the speed he needed, but the Zelari were relentless. The warship loomed overhead, its weapons aimed at them. Just as they were about to be cornered, a sudden blast from behind sent the Zelari soldiers scattering. A new force had arrived, human reinforcements, led by Marcus, one of the resistance leaders. Together, they fought off the Zelari, creating a path for the team to escape. With one final push, they reached the extraction point. The mission was a success. They had dealt a significant blow to the Zelari, but they had also drawn the attention of their greatest weapon. As they left the battlefield behind, Ethan looked out at the horizon. The war was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. The resistance had struck back, and they had survived. They had made their stand.